Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of No Limits. My name is Scott Morgan, Roth the Motor City Mad Mouth. Glad to have you with us tonight, and we introduce a special guest. His name is the leadership freak, Dan Rockwell. Dan, welcome to the big show, No Limits.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Great to be here.
Well, we're really glad to have you. I'm sure over the course of this broadcast, there will be a lot of people that can definitely benefit by a lot of what you represent. So let me go over some of the basic information for a lot of our listeners, and we'll start with this, folks. Just so you know a little bit about Dan, okay? He's a top 50 leadership expert. AMA he's a top 30 leader and a top 100 in terms of a leadership speaker. With that said, if you want impressive numbers, consider this. Dan has online subscribers right around 465,000. And then if you want to talk about his Twitter, he's over 342,000. And that is really impressive, Dan. I've got to tell you. How do you do it? I don't know. It's anybody's guess. But what's your magic in terms of trying to get that many people to follow you?
I'll tell you, Scott, I've really just tried to be a content person and deliver value. And I know that's kind of an underwhelming answer, but that's pretty much the answer.
Fair enough. So you told me that you're a dairy farm boy from Maine, milking cows twice a day. For all you farmers out there, he's your man. Go ahead. How do you give you a little bit more about your background? I'm sure we have all kinds of people listening here. Farmers, corporate people, you name it. But go ahead. I don't know if I can even milk one cow, let alone the fact that you've done probably quite a few in your day.
I'll tell you what, Scott, if you want to learn about the underside of a cow, you can talk to me because I've been down under there. Let me tell you. It was a great life for a young fella. I would not want that life today because actually I hated milking cows. Twice a day you had to milk those dang cows. But as a young fella, you had responsibility. Of course, the farm equipment was great, all that kind of stuff. Loved the machinery. And I learned how to work. I learned how to get up. I did my chores before school. I came home. I played basketball. I did sports and everything, but I also did my chores in the evening. And you just learn how to work. And that's just where I'm at. I'm still sort of that kid on the farm, even today.
Well, I got to tell you, another lifetime ago when I lived on close to 10 acres, my folks had horses, and I actually had to feed the horses myself. Well, when I got my first job in the restaurant business, I got out of that, and thankfully that gave me a little bit more money to put in my pocket, but did what I had to do with the chores, but had no problem going into the workforce. So I had a little farm activity, but not quite to the level that you had it. So
no, you're just a little novice fellow, that's all.
You got it. So you actually live in outside 10 miles from Williamsport, Pennsylvania. Everybody knows that's where the Little League World Series is at. Why don't you get a little bit more background on your ties to Williamsport and that area in general?
Yeah, we've been here we actually raised our family. We moved from Long Island, went from Maine to Long Island, and honestly, 60 miles out, beautiful area, the Hamptons, the whole thing. But you know what? It doesn't really suit a farm boy kind of mentality. And so we ended up moving here to Williamsport, Pennsylvania, or just outside. And when we came, actually, Williamsport's about 30,000 people. It's a thriving metropolis. But that was too big for us, and so we actually live out in the country, got this gorgeous view out here, and love Williamsport. And the Little League thing is awesome. It's our sole claim to fame.
Well, that's true. All eyes are on Williamsport. Once a year, I don't know if they're having anything this year because of COVID-19. But
actually, they canceled.
Yeah, yep. I figured that. Well, I'll tell you what, it's good that that town can be recognized, and I know the major league players were there. I think 1 year too. Didn't they? They came out there and checked out the little guys.
They started last year with a major league game. We have a minor league team, and they fixed the field all up. It's gorgeous here, and the major leaguers come every year now. They're scheduled to come every year. 2 major league teams come and play a game here during Little League Week. It's awesome.
Yeah, it really is. So let's talk about the fact that right now, because of COVID-19, that you're not doing anything until August in terms of travel. So what's it been like now that you've had a little more time on your hands?
Actually, I'm a bit of an introvert, and it hasn't bothered me at all. I've actually enjoyed having a little more time at home, more time to sit on the deck and have breakfast. I love having breakfast on the deck. And I know you're a Florida boy now, right?
Yeah, from Motown, but definitely Florida.
Yeah, and so it probably gets too hot in the summertime, but like this morning, it was about 65, 68 degrees, and I sat on the deck and had breakfast, and it's, plus I've had a chance to do more reading, and it's just been, I've enjoyed it personally. It's a good thing, but not everybody has been fortunate like that.
Well, so with that said, okay, you talk about coaching leaders. Why don't you talk about how to bring the best out of your team?
It's great. Let me ask you, Scott, do you want to focus on individuals or do you want to focus on teams?
Let's do both. How about that?
All right. Well, you know what? I've noticed over the years that there are moments that seem to transform leaders and give them an opportunity to make a leap forward. And one of the ways this happens is I'll have a conversation with a leader, and they're struggling with some issue and they're grappling with something, you know how that is. And I'll be talking with them, and then all of a sudden they'll light up. And at that moment, I'll say, ho, tell me what is going on for you, because that's where their energy is. So as a leader, one of the things to do is just notice people's energy. When are they bright? When are their eyes bright? When are they smiling and animated? And then help them reflect on what it is, what's going on for them. And when they find that, they can take that energy and that orientation to other situations and really find energy that helps carry them through. So one of the most transformative moments I see in a leader's life is when I say to them, you really just lit up. What's going on for you? And they see themselves in a new way. And that's very powerful.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, energy to me is something that I've always think should be as good as chicken pox or any type of things. You want it to be contagious, don't you, Dan?
You do. And I think there's an I don't want to be a pessimist, but I think really in organizations, there's a downward trend unless you fuel positive energy. If you're not fueling positive energy in your organization or in your own leadership, then you are naturally going to spin downward. I think that there are a few people, I think, that maybe are these bright, happy people all the time. I think they're fakers personally, because I kind of grapple with this, and I think leaders do, because you're always dealing with problems, right? You're always dealing with struggles, and so finding that energy and leveraging it for good and fueling it in yourself and others really helps leaders get further.
Well, that's for sure. So do you notice when people are at their best? How do you actually notice when they are? Are there any particular signals?
That's another really good thing about managing energy, and that is I will have leaders keep track for a week of their team members. So I'll say, look, what I want you to do is just keep a chart, and I want you to notice when someone seems to be more animated, more energized, smiling more, and what time of day is it? What are they doing? And you just track your team members, and then at the end of the week, you sit down and you start to have conversations with people about this. Because noticing, I think, is probably the first step in making this work.
Well, so with that said, though, when you talk about managing energy, there are trends when it goes up, and then there are trends go down.
That's true. And take, for example, an extrovert. An extrovert gets energized by interactions. So you need to know that about yourself. That all these, they go to a party and they come home. They can't sleep. They're excited. They're all jazzed up. They got tons of ideas. An introvert, on the other hand, and there are many introverted leaders, very successful leaders. Like the former CEO of Campbell Soup, Doug Conant, for example, a friend of mine, he's an introvert. And an introvert goes to a party and they come home exhausted. And so I work with introverted leaders, and what needs to happen for them is after they have been in groups and done a lot of personal interaction, they need time to re-energize. And that happens for them when they are alone. So they might be, they're going to be exhausted after these interactions. They need to plan to have a weekend away. I work with a Canadian leader and introvert, and he plans once a month to go away for a weekend and just have time to reflect and do some reading. And he does through the month. He realizes this, and so he takes time to just close the door and, just kind of settle himself and be by himself. And it isn't that introverts don't like people. It's just that introverts find energy different than extroverts. Extroverts find their energy more in that personal interaction stuff, and introverts get recharged when they have some quiet time.
So how much psychology goes into all this process?
People say to me sometimes, there's a lot of psychology in what you write, and maybe it's been of interest to me, but frankly, Scott, I'm not really educated in that area, and obviously, I read articles and things, but I guess the short answer is probably a lot, although I'm not the person to give you a real clarity on what that's all about. I just try to pay attention to people and in this case, notice what brings them energy and help them see it.
Well, if I could find Sigmund Freud, I would do it, but I like the direction that you're going, so I'm not going to really worry about that. So with that said, let's talk about the power of connecting, relationship building. You said you had some stories about that, so why don't you go ahead and convey that to the audience?
Well, thanks, Don. I had a conversation some years ago, I think it was in 2012, with a fellow by the name of Henry Mintzberg. Now, Henry Mintzberg is really, he's a big head, right? He's a really smart guy, scholar, writes books. He's a college professor and a Canadian, which you don't want to hold that against Canadians, right? Right. And so I'm having this conversation with Henry, and I said, Henry, what's your word of advice that you like to give, leaders? What's your favorite thing you like to, advise to leaders? And he said, Dan, I'm going to give you one word. So, of course, I was really interested, and he said the one word is connect. And that idea has really been very powerful in my life because I think it gives some direction to what you do on a day-to-day basis. Pay attention to connecting. And one of the things that Henry said is, it's pretty hard. I shouldn't say that. It's harder to be arrogant when we are in relationship with people. Relationships tend to humble us a little bit, and not always, but it's hard. It's more difficult to be arrogant, and arrogance is generally the source of most of the bad stuff in leadership. And humility, everything good in leadership starts with humility. So when Henry gave me this one word, connect, it just made me realize that it's more than just getting stuff done. And so there's a discussion in leadership about results. Everybody tell me about results. And sometimes people say, it's the results or relationships, because relationships take too long. But in the end, it's really results through relationships. We build strong relationships, and that helps us have tough conversations. We build strong relationships, and that helps motivate people. We build strong relationships, and then we learn what people are really great at, and then we can point them at the things that they're really great at.
Well, that's a good point, because nowadays, at a time where in many industries cold calling is really not the norm anymore, you have networking events, and I think a lot of the networking events are attributed to what you just talked about with the relationships aspect. Would you agree?
You got to just build those relationships, because then if you're looking for business, you say, oh, I remember so-and-so. Or if you want to help, somebody calls you want to be helpful, you need to know what their business is about and what their focus is and, what's going to be useful to them. So, yes, I work with a fellow who does selling, and he just happened to shift an area in his business. He's in a different business side of the business. Now he has all new relationships to build, and he says, Dan, he said, I'm just really realizing all those relationships I had made business so much more enjoyable and fruitful, because he had these great, you call somebody up and say, hey, Scott, how you doing? And there's a bit of a relationship there, and that just opens the door for good results. If you don't have the relationship, distrust, it's harder to build trust. It's harder people feel like you're trying to manipulate them, but the relationship is really foundational.
Yeah, good point, because, I've been in sports media for the better part of 40 years, and a lot of the guests I bring on are people I've known for a lot of years, where, and I've built a lot of good relationships as well, not only on Twitter, Facebook, but LinkedIn as well. And as you start to build those relationships, and I believe the best part of leadership or any thing, it all comes down to the win-win situation, Dan, and I'll never go back on that. You want to let people know that, what, I'm not looking at anything self-personal gain. How can I help you out? And I think that as long as you have that win-win situation, then I don't think there's any way really that you can lose. So, so let's talk about tough conversations. I know we mentioned that earlier. Describe what you meant by all that.
Well, yeah, all leaders, we all have to have tough conversations. You have a situation that doesn't work out right, somebody screws up, or somebody doesn't see that they're screwing up, or there's a misunderstanding, and we all have to have tough conversations. And honestly, just to segue from building relationships, right? If you want to have if you want to have effective tough conversations, then you need to have a great relationship before you have those conversations. Let's face it, if you and I are buds and there's an issue in the business or whatever, and we could actually go out and have lunch and talk it over, and say those, how it is. You can say things to your friend that you might not say to somebody you don't know. So a tough conversation really begins with building strong, positive relationships. And there are other things, but I've talked long enough as it is here, I guess. But
oh, no, I can listen to you all day and all night, but I realize that we all have a time factor. I'm just kidding with you. You're awfully interesting, so anybody that can't get anything out of you, shame on them. With that said, okay, let's go on to the next thing, and that's communicating and motivating during a pandemic. That must be quite challenging, isn't it?
Yeah. Isn't it interesting? Let's face it, everything's going to be easier during a pandemic if you have a great relationship with your team. If you don't have a great relationship with your team, then what happens? Stressful times make a business more difficult and more stressful when we don't have strong, trusting relationships with everybody. One of the things that I found during these days is that leaders are learning that a conversation doesn't have to just be about business. So during a pandemic, it's like, hey, Scott, how you doing? What's going on for you? How's the family? How are you navigating being home all the time? Showing some personal interest is one of the ways you can help people navigate successfully during a pandemic. I think things that we normally do or maybe do a little of, we could up our game on, like expressing appreciation. We do it, and we should. And maybe during a pandemic, saying thank you means a little more today than it meant before this happened. I'll tell you another one, and that is nostalgia. I'm not a nostalgia fan, right? I'm a forward-facing guy. But I have started playing oldies more during the pandemic. I'm listening to music from the 60s, and somehow I think, connecting with the old days might be useful. Rituals are useful. I've really been focusing on rituals a lot these days. So I get up in the morning, I get my coffee, I come down, I have my desk cleaned off. I never did that. In the evening, I clean my desk off, and so when I come down in the morning, it's clean. There's a coaster for my coffee cup. I set my coffee cup down. I hit the power button on my computer and log in, type in my password. I get down on the floor. I do 50 sit-ups, and I get at my computer. I spend a little time in reflecting, quiet, and taking some notes. No email, and about 30 minutes. And so I started having a morning ritual. And so I think rituals can be helpful during tough times because they bring a little sense of stability.
Okay. So let me ask you, are you a big believer in meditation? Because one of the most relaxing things that I do, Dan, is I like to take long drives down the ocean, listening to music, and even when I take drives around the country, for me, that's my sense of relief. I make some of my best decisions Dan, through the power of meditation. And I'll tell you what, everybody has their thing, but for me, there's nothing like a nice, relaxing drive to sort out my mind and my thoughts.
That's fantastic. It's so good that you know that. So you're so much better. If you didn't know that, think of what you'd be missing. Some people they do it. The shower, right? That's that sort of meditation time. All of a sudden, you have a great idea, right? My problem is I have so many great ideas, right? I forget them. Like if I don't write them down, you know what I'm saying? And then the other problem I have is I wake up in the night and I have a great idea and I jot it down in the morning. I think, what were you thinking?
Well, what I actually do, now that you brought that up, is I do have a notepad with me, and if I need to pull off the side on whether it's in a parking lot or not, I write those ideas down, because once those ideas are gone, and they're really gone, I have to admit my wife calls me a crazy man, because, even when I drive at night, sometimes it takes me on a long trip, Dan. It'll take a little while to get going, just get out of the gate, but I get stronger as time goes on. And when your wife gives you the name Crazy Man, I didn't understand it at the beginning, but then all of a sudden it wore on me after a while. But geez, nothing that a notebook can't clear, a pen can't clear. And if I really, really, really got a good idea, then mark my word, I don't forget it. And I don't know about you, but caffeine to me is like gasoline, and the more I get, the louder I get, and the more energy I get. Boy, that's a common denominator. So caffeine is what I consider my petro.
Love to hear you talking. Love to hear you explaining what works for you. See this, hey, if you're stuck, it's like me in the afternoon. The afternoon is not my best time, that's for sure. So I can put my headphones on, I can play some, oldies, and that re-energizes me. You can hop in your car, take a drive, think about things, come back, refresh, have a new idea, get yourself unstuck. Fantastic.
Well, it's amazing. When I took my wife to work one time, and it was a Friday, so I ended up taking her, I drove around all of Lake Okeechobee, and I was actually like 35 or 40 minutes running a little bit behind. And you know what? She said, where did you go? Oh, I only went to Lake Okeechobee. He said, you did what? Oh, yeah, I drove the whole day. I didn't want to go back home. I was getting a little kind of bored after a while, and who knows what was going to happen there. I mean, taking pictures. And to me, whether I'm taking pictures, see, one of the things I want to do down the road is outside of what I do on the air, whether it's broadcasting, building an online publication, I have a burning desire to write a book at some point, but I really want to do public speaking. That's really one of the things I'm targeting, and the more I build this platform and the more I continue to work with different people, I'm determined to be a professional public speaker at some point down the road. And to me, the only thing that'll stop me is when the man upstairs says you can't talk anymore. Then it's pretty hard to win that argument. But
yeah, that's a hard one to win. Yeah, that's fantastic. What a great aspiration.
Yeah, well, you see, I look at myself. You ever heard of that thing called Timex? Okay, you take a licking and keep on ticking, right? Okay. So, see, with me, I take a licking and keep on talking. So, I don't know who stole that line, but nobody's trademarked that. So, when you talk about the energy I have, energy, take a licking and keep on talking, go ahead and realize that nobody gets fatigued thinking that way. I'm sure that I've taken sleep apnea to levels where, it takes me a while to wind down from anything I do after the fact. So that's a little bit of my crazy off-the-wall world. With that said, I during the pandemic have noticed that a lot of people could come across and get Zoom fatigue. What's your definition, Dan, of Zoom fatigue?
Well, we didn't realize that looking at a group of people on your computer monitor and having them look at you can be exhausting. It's interesting, because they're not in the room with you, but Zoom fatigue is just this fatigue that we get from all of these video conferences where people they were doing it some, but they weren't doing a lot of video conferencing. And now I'm talking to leaders, and all day long it's one video conference after another, and it becomes exhausting, just the repetition of it. But also, it's just those people looking at you. When you have a conversation, you tend not to look directly in people's eyes all the time. Right? You kind of look away, but when you're sitting in front of the monitor, it can really, surprisingly, right? It can really be draining. And so people are learning about Zoom fatigue. And honestly, some people are saying, well, we need to have a phone conversation, and you're not saying it, but it's like, so we don't have to look at each other, right? We got to have a phone conversation. Another thing people are doing is sometimes they're just having fun. They're putting on hats or strange ties, or, I was on a Zoom call and one of the people had some sort of weird mask on for a while, and they're just trying to lighten up. And that kind of helps. But Zoom fatigue is a real thing these days for teams.
Yeah. What I'm finding out with networking, I think post-pandemic is more and more people are going to go to these Zoom meetings, and I think there may eventually be less face-to-face interaction. I've learned to get used to them. Not the only time I ever knew about Zoom was what I used to do on the roads when I used to Zoom past every slow driver on the planet. But then again, that's just how it goes. But I've learned it in a different way. I think the one thing I am having fun with the Zoom stuff is I come up with a virtual background. And since I like to consider myself a road warrior, I had somebody say, well, where you at? Well, one day Nashville. The other one right in front of the new Fort Lauderdale Sports Complex. 1 minute I'm out in the Florida Panhandle doing something. So I try to keep them off guard a little bit about where I'm at, because I've already proven, how are we going to keep it interesting if I just keep it all, let's go back to the old living room thing. That doesn't show you anything. You can't be colorful. Let me tell you, years ago when I used to sell cars, I had a short-lived career, okay, and they required that I wear a tie. You know what I used to do? I used to use gimmick ties so that I could break the ice when it came to selling cars. And, the manager got upset with me. He said, what are you worried about? Do you know anything about sales, man? Don't you realize that thing called breaking ice? I sold a few cars. I said, yeah, do me a favor. Manage your team and don't worry about what tie I'm wearing, because you might find that some people are laughing at the stupid thing anyhow. And
it's real. You can do that. It's authentic, right? It's fun, and you don't feel awkward. You just have some enjoyment, right?
Well, yeah, that's it. I mean, really. I mean, if somebody's commenting on a Three Stooges time, don't tell me a person back in the day didn't like the Three Stooges. I mean, it's the way I've always looked at it. And, nothing wrong with loosening up things and warming things up. So let's talk about, we talked about the related to Norman Rockwell, the artist. Explain to me that story.
So my last name's Rockwell, as you know, and I'm standing in a bank one day, and the teller used my name, and the person behind me heard the name Rockwell. She interrupted our conversation, and she said, "Are you related to Norman Rockwell? He's a famous painter, American painter." And I said, "Why, yes, I am. Norman is my uncle." And before I could finish, she said, she reached out and literally she touched my arm, and maybe that's sexual harassment or something. I don't know. Maybe I can get something from that. But anyway, she reached out and touched my arm. She said, "Let me touch a relative of Norman Rockwell." What I didn't tell her is that my Norman Rockwell, my uncle, is actually was a jet mechanic for the Air National Guard. So he was not actually a painter, but I never did tell her the difference.
Really? Very interesting. Well, hey, why not? So with that said, my brother-in-law used to work at a place called Rockwell Automation out in Milwaukee. I'm going to give you some stories about how we use my name, but what are your thoughts about having the same last name as a lot of companies, let alone Rockwell Automation in Milwaukee?
Yeah, I have to just tell people, back to that farm boy from Maine thing, right? They'll say, "Hey, are you this?" I have a very unimpressive heritage, from a worldly point of view. I'm the first one who graduated from college from my family. My dad, by the way, was awesome. He was awesome. He adopted me when I was 2. My mom had me out of wedlock, and back then it was, matter of fact, I never found out I was adopted until I was 60. Really? And she never told me. But, my dad is an awesome guy, and, I learned about life from him on the farm. But honestly, I just have to straighten people out and say, you know what? It's just I'm a dairy farm boy from Maine. That's about as good as it gets.
Well, when we have fun with the name game, I got to tell you, like yourself, I'm the first one that ever graduated from college in my family as well. I probably took the most unceremonious route, at least back at the time. I did my junior college work here in Southern Florida, and then transferred to the University of South Florida. Couldn't have gotten a better name or a mascot for me. It was the University of South Florida Bulls, and a lot of people call me the Bull because of my personality. And I have no problem. I really loved it. But I have to tell you, the Rockwell name carries a lot of weight. But I'll tell you what, I have a city and two cities. Arizona loves me quite a bit. They named a city after me called Scottsdale, Arizona. What a beautiful thing. Okay.
Isn't that great?
Oh, yeah.
Scott, you need to come out of your shell.
I do. Sounds good. Oh, I will. I can't wait to get up and see you. Don't worry, we'll do a lot of that. But then I got another city called Bullhead City. I mean, I get it all over Arizona, seriously. But you know what? Here's the biggest kicker, okay, Dan? Bet when I was growing up as a kid, I even had a supermarket named after me called Great Scott Supermarket. And folks, in the wonderful world of Google, maybe people will tell you Great Scott Supermarket once upon a time was a supermarket in Metro Detroit. So, my name, like yours, is connected all over the planet. It's just about bringing out those creative juices to go out there and do it. So let's talk about people thriving in terms of performance when we use their strengths and not their weaknesses, because you had a really good theory on that.
Well, it's not original with me, that's for sure, but let's just face it. Performance is never found in weakness. Performance is always comes out of strength. We perform in our strengths. The problem sometimes in organizations and with leaders is we see what people don't do well, and we try to focus on that. And we try to improve weaknesses. Now, we should say that some weaknesses need to be improved in some ways, but we will never really thrive in our weaknesses. Let's take a kid who loves math and hates English. You gotta learn English a little bit anyway. But when it comes time for homework, it's not like, oh, I can't wait to do my English. No, I can't wait to do my math. I'm good at math. I love to do math. And so we thrive in our strengths. That's the only place we really perform. And for the most part, I got to be careful here. I think it's a waste of time to focus on people's weaknesses. Now, there are some weaknesses that do need to be corrected. For example, maybe you're really great with details and you're really great with research, but you can't make a decision, right? It's analysis paralysis. And so you may need to learn how to make decisions a little bit, but you're always going to be great at analysis and research. And so you need to find places where you can leverage that strength. You need to find places, Scott, where you can interact and you can use that energy. Somebody might look at you and say, "Hey, Scott, you need to calm down, man." And the answer to that is no. That not everybody's going to love Dan, not everybody's going to love Scott, but you got to find a place where you can use your strength.
Well, I got to tell you, you make a great point here, because name me one math person out there that's probably a good journalist or a broadcaster. There might be some out there, but the whole consensus is if you are a math person, okay, you're not good at English, and if you're a good English person, you're not good at math, because it's either the numerical part or the language part. So it's, they're definitely totally two things that are very different, but yet you need both. The way I handled college was I was adequate enough to get through a general math class. It took me 2 times to get through, okay, only because I had one instructor in college that, I didn't need 4 days of math. In fact, all the tougher classes I used to take were usually during the summer, because I knew there was so much material, you can only get so much done. Or if I really didn't like certain classes, I'd take them and go there 3 hours once a week, and that was just enough to get the job done. My life story here would be, I've been known to win ugly, not win pretty, so that's okay. I really don't frankly care. But
I think here's the thing.
Yeah.
We all have to realize that we suck at much more than we excel at. There are so many things we're not good at, and we can't obsess about that. We can't let that get us down, because of all the things that can be done in the world, you and I suck at most of them. But there are a few things that we excel at. Now, you just figure it out. What should we focus our energy on?
Well, obviously what you're good at, not what you're not good at, which is a lot anyhow. I mean, here, well, you want me to further embrace what you just said? A baseball player, to me, that's hitting 250 and with a fair amount of home runs and RBI is considered a smashing success, okay? And baseball players have it tough mentally because they fail more than a lot of the other sports out there. You can hide 25 points a game in the NBA. You can get a decent amount of goals in the NHL. And, of course, certain positions are judged in the NFL a certain way, but baseball players have it tough. Why do you think Michael Jordan got humbled playing baseball? I mean, he did. But you know what? Nobody's saying he's a good athlete, but baseball goes out there and gives you that mental beating that you're going to have, and that's why a lot of them can't do it. What makes a lot of what you say even more valuable was when I was a young sports writer, I had an opportunity. My first NFL coach I ever worked with was Don Shula. You ever heard of him?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So he told me that, you know, the key to his success was I don't get people to do what they can't do, only utilize their strengths and not weaknesses. And if I recall correctly, okay, Don Shula is the all-time winningest coach in NFL history. Don Shula is the author of the only undefeated season, couple Super Bowl titles, and the beat goes on and on. Iconic is spelled Donshula. So if you're going to go out there and if you're going to compare, you know, doing what you do, you certainly took a good guy there to compare what you're talking about with Coach Shula.
Yes, and you can spell.
Well, you know, I got to tell you, I was actually pretty good at a spelling bee a long time ago, too. I enjoyed those things.
Yeah.
Those are fun. In fact, you know, I'll never forget when I was in elementary school that the word I mixed up on was accept. Otherwise, one of my teachers thought I was going to go all the way, and I'm thinking I'll never forget that word again. After all, it cost me a chance to go ahead and accelerate in the spelling bee, but spelling was pretty neat. You know, I mean, and yet I needed calculators because I knew back then I wasn't a math whiz anyhow. So the only geometry.
I need to keep you on speed dial because sometimes I can't even spell a word wrong right enough to get spell check to tell me what it is. I'm such a bad speller that spell check doesn't even help me sometimes.
Well, of course. I mean, put me on speed dial. You're recorded in my phone. It doesn't make any difference to me. Anytime you need to get hold of me, Dan Rockwell Electronics, no big deal. All the other things that are connected with it, it's okay. So let's talk about, you have more stories on the Little League. Are there any particular stories that you want to talk about? I'm sure that's something that you really are passionate about.
You know, Little League is so awesome, and I was very fortunate. I was on the board for original Little League, and the founder of Little League, of course, comes from Williamsport, and I knew his name is Carl Stutz, and I knew Carl, and he had a big impression on me. He was a small man, and he was so humble. I remember going to games, and I was coaching our kids and stuff, and you know, being involved, and he would be there in one of those old-fashioned lawn chairs. You know, not the kind with the plastic slats, the kind with that like those wide fiberglass slats. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
And he would be sitting on the end of the bleachers, you know, in his chair down at the end, and kids and people would come and they would ask him to sign their baseballs and their gloves But I'll tell you what, Carl was a humble man. He never really, tried to leverage this for his own fame. And the story of how Little League got started is so profound. He's playing catch with two of his nephews, Major and Jimmy Guerin are their names. And Major and Jimmy, Carl was married and he had a daughter, and back then girls didn't play catch, because that wasn't girly, and so he would be playing catch with these two nephews of his, and they were out in the field one day playing catch and playing ball, and he chased down a stray hit and when he did, he stumbled over the stump of a lilac bush, and he really scut his ankle badly. And he goes to the back porch. He's sitting on the back step, and he's kind of nursing his wound there. And it's in this moment that it hits him. And he looks at Major and Jimmy, and he says, "How would you like to play baseball on a real field with a new ball for every game and umpires and uniforms. Now, kids were playing baseball long before Little League, but they didn't have fields their size. They didn't have equipment their size. They didn't have umpires and all of that. And it was in that moment that Carl conceived of Little League. And the next year, it took a year, and it was actually at the end of the Great Depression. And the next year, he raised enough money, and there were three teams in the original Little League. It was Lycoming Dairy, Lundy Lumber, and Jumbo Pretzel. And those three teams were the first Little League. And they had their uniforms, and they experimented with how far to run and where the pitcher mound should be, and all of that. It's just such a great thing. Here's what it gets me about Carl.
What's that?
Carl did not set out to change the world. Right? I think we sometimes think, I got to go change the world. Carl just set out to make the world better for two little boys. And making the world better for two little boys, Major and Jimmy Guerin, turned into really change. The footprint of Carl Stutz is global. Right? The Little League is all over the place. And so many families and kids have been helped because Carl wanted to do good by his two nephews. It just is so powerful to me.
Well, it's amazing. We talk about Little League. My father, Mike Morganroth, was the coach of my team for 5 of the 6 years. And, I'll never forget when you talk about strengths and weaknesses. The first 2 years I played Little League, I was kind of like lost. But once upon a time, both of our catchers didn't show up, and then he asked who wants to be catcher. Well, I was a horrible outfielder. My attention span out in left field was bad. So I made sure my hand was raised as loud as he could be. The only way my father couldn't see it or hear it is if he was deaf and blind, and he definitely wasn't. So I went out there, raised it, said, go ahead, go behind the plate, see what happens. Well, you know what? When I got that position, I never gave it back. Those two guys would subsequently quit. And, I got to tell you, one of my favorite guests here on our network is a guy by the name of Mark Littell. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he's a pitcher formerly of the Kansas City Royals, St. Louis Cardinals, who has a championship ring, that gave up the game-winning home run to Chris Chambliss. And Mark's a regular guest. Chambliss, of course, the New York Yankees. And Mark's a frequent guest on our show. And, I wish I would have had his product, the Nutty Buddy, because I'll tell you, with the way I was getting blasted behind the plate with foul balls, I'm telling you, it would have made a youngster like me that was probably the better part of 10, 11 years old feel a whole lot better because it stung back there. But,
Yes.
But my dad and Don Shula have something in common. Shula was 17-0 in the year 1973. My Wildcats team was 21-0. We won the city championship. So if I can be, and as we approach Father's Day, hopefully my father's listening to this. Dad, I haven't forgotten about you in many ways, but I'm going to tell you that 21-0 season was special, and an early happy Father's Day with him as well. So I wanted to share that story with you. I know we have a lot of fun sharing stories with one another because this is all about positive energy that, Dan, that we're trying to share. We want to make sure that people can get it in a lot of different ways. So with that said, you say you work with teams dynamics about emotional intelligence and work. You want to know who you are and knowing your team. Why don't you go into more detail about that, Dan?
Well, a team, and so many of us are working on teams now, and to get a team performing takes a lot of work. A poor-performing team, I think, is sometimes more normal than a high-performing team because it only takes one or two lousy players or lousy attitudes to kind of suck the energy out of the team. And, let's tie together this idea of strengths and, what people do well to creating team dynamics. One of the things I'll have teams do is make a list of everyone on the team and write down the 3 strengths that they think those people have. So if you have 10 people on the team, you have 10 people or 9 people writing down what they think your strengths are. So then I'll have them compile it and then give that sheet to everybody around the table. So everybody's going to get, 25 or 30 items on a list that says, we think you're great at this. This really, why don't we do more of this? I mean, because now we show respect for each other's strengths. And the other thing that helps is just to know, everybody on the team needs to know the 2 or 3 things that everybody else is great at. They also need to know the 2 or 3 things that you suck at, that you just know good at. And that, the vulnerability and the relationship that happens there and the respect that happens, we don't expect you to be great at everything. So what do we want to make sure we focus your attention on? Or what do we make sure that someone else does that you don't do so well? So I love to have teams have these conversations about what they're great at. Sometimes I remember one of the first times I did this, Scott. I asked the team around the table. We're sitting around a conference table, and there probably were 10 of them, 8 or 10 of them. And I said, what I'd like you to do is, I'm going to say one of the names at the table, and I want each, 2 or 3 of you to just say, the thing I really admire about you is, and finish that sentence. And so I would say, I say, hey, Mike, Mike. I say Mike, and somebody would say, well, Mike is, I really admire this about Mike. And I kid you not, Scott, and these are leaders of an organization, some people teared up. They never really talk to each other about these kind of things. And just think about it. Where does the energy come from? Does it come from getting kicked in the butt all the time? I mean, some of it, we can rise up when people challenge us, but there's this other energy that says, you know what, you're so good, I just admire this. How do you do that, So I think team dynamics include talking to each other about what we're good at. I'll give you just a quick tip on this too, Scott, about making a team work. Google has done some research on this, that one of the key factors for a successful team is that all of the members around the table talk about an equal amount of time over time, not necessarily every meeting. It's very simple if you're leading a team, to make sure that everybody is contributing about the same amount, so you don't have somebody dominating. So team intelligence goes up as all the team members are contributing. But if some an introvert, for example, sits back and doesn't really say anything, well, then you're missing that component of the team. So Google's research, very simple. Just make sure everybody's talking about the same amount of time over time in your meetings.
I think the one thing you pointed out to me earlier was that people have to know who you are versus who they are. Why don't you elaborate on that, Dan?
Yeah, I take teams through emotional intelligence training, and there's a great book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. It has exercises and all of that. So what we'll do is we'll take an assessment. People will see where they're at. They'll choose an area of focus and start to do some practices and share it with everybody else. The point is this: self-awareness is not just one of those fuzzy words that maybe a farm boy might scoff at. There's plenty of time in my life where I think, self-awareness and emotional intelligence, but that's for tree-hugging hippies. And so self-awareness, we never grow if we're not self-aware. We need to know who we are and have a sense of who we are. And as we learn that, we also start to develop a higher sense of what's going on for other people and our impact on them. And that's all about leadership too. So knowing who we are helps us focus on what we're good at, understand our impact on others, helps us find our energy, and then it also helps us connect better with others. And there's great exercises and great material out there on emotional intelligence. Matter of fact, 75% of career derailments, those careers that go off the tracks, are connected to some sort of emotional intelligence issue that they just don't seem to have that squared away.
So when you connect self-awareness, I guess it really comes down to you just have to basically do your business, right?
Well, part of self-awareness is knowing your triggers, for example. And sometimes leaders don't even know what it is that's setting them off or making them stressed. So monitoring what's going on in your own life and in your own heart, and understanding, things that are important to you. So there is this sense of self-awareness. I don't like the idea of self-awareness and selfish. You know what I mean? I don't want people to be selfish. I want us to be serving. But in order to really serve effectively, we still need to know those things that light us up, those things that stress us out, those things that make us angry, and monitor that. And some people are so focused on results and so focused on maybe what's wrong that they lose themselves. And I'll tell you this, I just happened to think of it. I'll tell you this, I would say 25 to 30, 40% of the leaders I coach are more experienced leaders, high level, and they have lost themselves to business and they have no energy. They say, Dan, I am toast. I just want to walk away from here. I coached a leader in Vegas. He said, Dan, I feel like I'm on an interstate in Texas. It's a long, flat highway. It's 2 a.m. and there are no exits. I have been driving and I cannot get off this thing. By the way, I went out to Vegas and we had a meeting and talk about what works for people and what changes them. So we're having dinner, he and his wife. He'd been fairly depressed all day. He starts to talk about his kids. And man, that guy lights up. And I said, what is going on with you? He said, I love being a father. Make a long story short, I said to him, what happens in your thinking if tomorrow, when you walk into work, you don't tell anybody else you do this because it's weird, but you put on your father hat. You don't put on your leader hat. You show up as a father leader. Now, you got to be careful here. You don't want to go around and say, "Ooh, your daddy's home." That's not it. But I'll tell you what happened to him. It completely shifted his focus on work. And I asked him, I said, hey, what changes in your approach to work when you put your father hat on? And I was so surprised. He said, you know what, Dan, I think I would hold people more accountable. And to me, I thought he was going to say, I think I hug people more, but no, he said, I'm not holding people accountable like I should. And it was stressing him out. And as a dad, he knew what it meant to make sure that the kid mowed the grass or did the chores. And he started to bring that to work. He put his father hat on. He didn't tell anybody else, but he said, I'm showing up as a father leader. Changed his life.
Dan, for me, I follow my instincts probably 95 to 98% of my time. Sometimes I feel I should do it 100% of the time. What do you? What percentage would you say you follow your instincts, and what percentage would you say that many people should? I know it's a very open-ended question, but to me, I would be in trouble without my instincts.
People hire me, right, to coach them, and it took me a while to learn to listen to my heart and kind of go with it. And so somebody would be talking, I may be in a coaching conversation with someone, and I start to have this feeling like, I'm starting to sink on the inside. It's like something's going wrong. And at the beginning, when I started doing this, I didn't really say anything. I started just bringing it up. And like you're saying, 95% of the time, there's an issue there. Occasionally, you're off base. But I've learned that what people hire when they hire me is they're hiring me. And I need to bring myself. I need to pay attention to what's going on. So when I feel energized, I tell people, wow, I'm feeling the energy here. What's going on? When somebody starts to talk, and I had a guy I coached out in North Dakota, and he liked to prepare for his board meetings. And so we were having this board meeting conversation, and I said, well, tell me what you want to say to him. And he started telling me what he was going to say. And, man, I'm just sinking on the inside. And he got done, and we knew each other. And I said, you can do so much better than this. Let's try again. I just told him, I'm thinking, man. And he's a great communicator. And so I said, you're better than this. Take a breath and let's try again. And he came at that from a different angle, and it was beautiful. So go with there is a sense of go with your gut. You have to be careful because you can think your gut is always the answer, and sometimes you could be off base on it. But they hire me to I've learned people hire me, and I'm most useful to them when I just give them my heart, and that, I think, maybe speaks to what you're saying. Just go with who you are.
Yeah, I mean, I've lived by my gut feeling, instincts, and, if something's telling you something internally, okay, and 95% of the time you feel like you got it right. I don't know about you, but in school, and you're in the 90s, you're in A range, okay, and so for me, I just think that whether it's a gut feeling or instinct, you've got to follow it because there's some sort of a force internally that's telling you to do it. I'm not trying to just pin you on a number. All right, Dan, okay, what percentage of the time do you follow your instincts? Although, because at some point everybody has a different number. But if you had to associate a number of how you go about doing things, would you be able to provide one? That would be nothing more than a mere approximate.
Yeah. In the area, and I think this is important to this, Scott, and that is, if you have no experience in an area, you probably should be skeptical of a gut feeling.
Okay.
But if you have a lot of experience in an area, so like when it comes to coaching, now I'm completely comfortable. I couldn't think of a time where if I started to sink when someone told me something, I wouldn't say it to them. I would say, like you're saying, it's pretty near 100% of the time that they may not be ready for something, like a confrontation. They may be very discouraged and they need a little time. But overall, especially in the coaching area, I'm going to go with, that inner feeling, that inner sense, really all the time, except for very rare exceptions.
Well, that's fair. I mean, I can tell you right now, sometimes I am very superstitious about what I do. But again, I'm not trying to turn this into a deep psychology conversation. It's all about really educating, motivating, and letting people find out what gets them to trigger, how they are able to obtain leadership. Because I know leadership can be broken down into two ways. You can either be vocal. I've seen a lot of vocal leaders on a team. Or you can say leading by example. And I can tell you one thing about my beautiful wife. What allows her to do her job well is she's not one of those yelling type of people. She just motivates by example. And I think leadership can be, what do you think? Leading by example or go out there being more vocal? Which one do you think is more effective?
Well, Koussis and Posner have written a book called The Leadership Challenge. It's a fantastic book. People ask me, Dan, what books do you recommend? And the first thing I'll say is, have you read The Leadership Challenge? And it's in its sixth printing now, and it's Barry Posner and Jim Koussis have wrote it. And they say there are 5 functions of leadership, and the first one is model the way. Now, that doesn't mean, you're a vocal leader, but you also have to be consistent in your life, right? You got to model the way. Now, some of us are going to model the way and not be quite as vocal, right? They're going to be more on the sideline kind of leader. That's okay. Some people call this leading from the front versus leading from the back. It's so interesting, Scott. There are people who succeed as an up front leader, and there are people who succeed as a behind the scene leader. There are extrovert leaders who succeed. There are introvert leaders who succeed. So it's not like you have to be a certain way, but whatever way you are, you have to be consistent. You have to model the way. You have to be authentic in who you really are.
Now, as a motivational speaker like you are in leadership, I know you probably know some of the prominent ones, David Yoho, Zig Ziglar, and I'm sure the list goes on. Have you ever had a chance to look at the way they motivate people? And have you taken ideas about how you go about doing things? Because I know a lot of people like to look at other people to see if there's anything that they could utilize in their repertoire.
You take somebody like Zig Ziglar. What a fantastic communicator Zig was. I did not have an opportunity to have a relationship with Zig. Now, I've interviewed and talked to his son who runs the organization now. But, what a fantastic communicator. And I think you can learn things from others. But the other side of that is somehow we're back to when people hire me to speak, they hire me. They want something authentic. And so I have to do a little bit of the farm boy stuff, right? I have to do a farm story. I have to talk about Little League, and I have to talk about Carl Stutz, because that's my life. But in general, the idea of a story is really powerful, right? Those things motivate people. I love to tell a Carl Stutz story of Little League when I do presentations, and often I'll put it at the end, and I'll say, Carl did not set out to change the world. He just set out to make life better for 2 little boys. And I love that sentence. I find it encouraging and motivating. And so you tie something to a story and you get a principle out of it. And I feel like that really does motivate and encourage people.
Wow, that's really powerful stuff. So, just so you know, you're listening to No Limits on the WSAN network. My name is Scott Morgan, out the Motor City Madmouth. Glad to have with us tonight Dan Rockwell. And Dan, I'll tell you what, it's been such a pleasure having you on the broadcast tonight. Any other advice you want to give to our listeners out there that we haven't talked about? I know we've covered a great deal, but maybe there's something that you might want to add that we haven't mentioned so far.
I think, for me personally, the change in my leadership happened when I realized I'd been focusing on myself so much, and now I'm learning to focus on others. And it's so interesting because we did talk about self-awareness, but the reason for self-awareness is so we can be effective with others. And others aren't the enemy, right? We're here to serve others, and that shift in thinking really has been helpful to me. It's not. You don't have to make it all about you. And so often, especially as a younger leader, it was all about me and what I was doing. And and now it's much, much more about how can I serve others. And it seems like, Scott, that the more effective we become at serving others, then really the broader and richer our own lives become too. So it's a good thing. So I just encourage all of us, including myself, keep serving, keep working like Carl did. Try to make life better for others. And that opens doors for us and for others.
I want you to go ahead and let the listeners know, and I'm going to read this because this was on your Twitter page. My dream is when people see me, they think that guy made my life better. Why don't you go ahead and elaborate on that? Because that, to me, Dan, was very impressive, and I think a lot of people can draw off of that.
Thanks for bringing it up, Scott. I have to tell you, sometimes at a conference or whatever, somebody will come up and they'll say, you made my life better, because they know what I'm all about. And isn't it surprising? We think if we just we want to make our own lives better, and so we live in ways that are selfish, and I do anyway. And when you start to realize, that doesn't really make life richer. It's the people you serve that make life richer. And so for me, and honestly, I think it was Zig, and you don't want to be a manipulator, but I think it was Zig Ziglar who said something like, you can have anything you want if you help people get what they want. And I don't want it to be manipulation. I don't want it to be I'm doing something for someone else so I can get what I want. You want to do it with an open heart and an open hand. But, your experience, I bet, is the same. That as we serve others, as we make others' lives better, we bring value and that we can bring, then our lives get bigger. Honestly, Leadership Freak and, the large following, I was just trying to be as useful as I possibly could be, and that's really what I'm trying to be, and some people find it useful, and so it works.
It's a very impressive message. I hope a lot of you folks that are listening to this broadcast, this is not a broadcast you listen to once. You go out there and listen to it multiple times, because I'm going to tell you one thing about Dan Rockwell. Okay, he's been around, he's done a lot, and he has so much to offer, and I'm just so privileged to have the opportunity to have him on our broadcast tonight. Dan, why don't you go ahead and let everybody know how they can go ahead and reach you in any way that you can spread the word, because I'll tell you what, I feel like the luckiest man on the planet having an opportunity to spend time with an incredible individual such as yourself.
Yeah, Scott, thank you. It's been my pleasure, really, to be here with you. And, I love the No Limits, the feel of No Limits. It's a great thing, so thanks. I'm very fortunate in that if you went to Google and typed in Leadership Freak, you would get me. And if people want to get in touch with me, they can send an email to dan@leadershipfreak.com.
Now, if I want to go ahead and take my driving meditation to a new level, all you need to do is go on Interstate 10 from Florida all the way to whether it's Arizona, L.A., and if you can get past 22 hours of Texas, let me tell you, you will have an incredible result. And I'm going to tell you something, Dan, I've taken that drive, and some of that Texas terrain is very boring. It's not like you're dealing with the mountains in the state of Texas and a lot of big cities. So meditation gets taken to a new level there. So I thought I'd throw that Texas two-step for driving out there, so that you want to talk about Texas fatigue to go with Zoom fatigue. No, nothing against you people out in Texas. You have a big state. Now, if you don't want to have a very big state, go to the panhandle of Texas, and then you'll hit Amarillo. Well, and that's a different route altogether. So meanwhile, just so you know how to get a hold of us here, this is Scott Morganroth. We're on the WSAN network. And if you want to follow us on Twitter, you can do that at Tribune South. Facebook, you can find us at South Florida Tribune. And I can tell you right now, Leadership Freak is also on Facebook, so I should point that out. Like that page as well. On Instagram, South Florida Tribune gets it done. I have a YouTube channel for the South Florida Tribune. Look forward to doing one of these with you, Dan, that we can do a video together somewhere down the road. Our website's www.southfloridatribune.com. You can email us at southfloridatribune@gmail.com, and LinkedIn, you can find me, Scott Morganroth, on LinkedIn. I'll be more than happy to go ahead and connect with you. You can find this broadcast on southfloridatribune.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And once again, you are listening to No Limits on the WSAN network. Hey, Dan, you know what? Once again, thanks for coming on the broadcast, and I look forward to continuous communication with you. I don't know, am I going to get a decent endorsement about me ever being a motivational speaker, or you think I'd bore the living daylights out of everybody?
I can't. I know I'm not going to go to sleep for at least an hour or two. So
really,
you got me all worked up.
Oh, I did. I guess that's not so bad, right?
That's awesome.
And you know, we call that in Detroit, Dan. Call it means the wheels are turning from Motown.
There you go.
Got to make sure every analogy is accounted for here. So, meanwhile, once again, on behalf of Dan Rockwell, the Leadership Freak, my name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Madmouth. Hoping you enjoyed this edition of No Limits here on the WSAN network. We look forward to another edition of No Limits next week. But meanwhile, I'd like to think in baseball terms, we had a grand slam home run tonight. And we hope you listen to this broadcast multiple times. And you can find us on the numerous outlets. But once again, Dan, pleasure being on the broadcast with you. And it's been a blessing. So take care. And if you're a father, happy Father's Day to you.
Thank you, Scott. And I am.
All right. Well, happy Father's Day to you and my dad, for that matter. Good night, everybody.